The Baltimore Ravens will enter the 2025 season not only as Super Bowl contenders, Tom and I certainly hope, but also as being incredibly fantasy relevant yet again. So I'm joined by Tom Strachan of the Fantasy Sanctuary as we talk all things Baltimore for our Redraft Fantasy Football Leagues in 2012. Absolutely not, 2025. The obvious place to start is with Lamar Jackson, baby. Last season's QB1 and the number one fantasy player overall. It was an impressive season last season, wasn't it? Not only in real life, but for fantasy, that consistency we've been craving, we got.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, 3 more fantasy points per game than Josh Allen was giving you. Like, that's the leverage you need when you're putting draft capital into a top pick for fantasy football. Lamar was a top 6 quarterback in 75% of his starts last year, 8 games over 25 points. There is no point drafting a quarterback highly if they can't give you this kind of ceiling. But Lamar just did it in ridiculous fashion. You know, the 6th most passing yards, over 4,000 for the first time in his career, 41 passing touchdowns, which ranked second in the league, 8.8 yards per attempt, which ranked first. So it wasn't just dink and dunk. He was driving the ball, and that creates fantasy points. He was just fantastic across the board. And we just know what we're getting from Lamar at this point in his career. Even the doubters have got nothing that they can say. This is a guy who, for all intents and purposes, is coming off one of the very best quarterback seasons we have ever seen when it comes to things like fewest interceptions on the amount of passing attempts and the amount of passing yards that he had, the amount of passing touchdowns he had. It was ludicrous. And at the same time, you're getting a quarterback who's rushed for over 130 rush attempts in all but one season. He's been over 695 rushing yards in every single season, even with the injuries, even with the rookie season, which was truncated.
And I think one of my favourite stats from last season is he had one bust game that fell out of the top 12. And even that bust game, he got you 15.88 fantasy points.
Exactly.
So it's, as far as a bust goes, that's all right. And that was week 11 against Pittsburgh. I think 3 weeks previous to that, he was the QB 9 on the week with only 17.5 points. So it's just how those weeks go. He's got the same supporting cast. Is still dual threat quarterback will continue to be. So he's got a super high ceiling. He feels, if you're going to take an early quarterback, as safe as it gets for redraft this season, isn't he?
I think that he's definitely up there. I can see why you can start building an argument again, is the idea that last year, the Ravens' pass defense, particularly for the first 11 weeks or so of the season, were diabolical. And that caused the Ravens to be in more pass-heavy situations than we'd perhaps expect them to always be. Now, we've gone out this offseason, spent a first-round pick on Malachi Starks, then we added Jair Alexander, and obviously Jair Alexander is what he is at this point in his career. But if he can play up to the level he has when healthy, then that's another Pro Bowl cornerback out there, along with Nate Wiggins, who's hanging over your left shoulder right now, who looked really good by the end of the season. Marlon Humphrey, who's been an excellent cornerback throughout his career. And then Kyle Hamilton, who soon will become the highest paid safety ever. So that secondary has the potential to really be better this year. The second year with the defensive coordinator. So maybe that brings the scoring down a little bit. Maybe that brings the plays per game down a little bit. But if you're talking about in redraft leagues, yeah, I have no qualms whatsoever spending a 3rd round pick, a 4th round pick on Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, and those 41 touchdowns last season, that could well be an outlier, but I think maybe 30 to 35 seems perhaps a safer sort of margin, do you reckon, next year?
Yeah, I mean, let's be real. There's not that many quarterbacks who go over 40 touchdowns consistently every year. Like, you are going to have years where you drop down slightly. And when you've got the running back room that Lamar has, it's always going to be possible for them to top up a decent amount of rushing touchdowns. Look what happened with Jalen Hurts last year. Saquon Barkley ran so pure that it ate into his production. But what Lamar gives us from a rushing point of view, as well as from an efficiency point of view, I still have plenty of confidence that it'll pay off.
And when we're talking about Lamar Jackson's rushing, the complement to that last year in the absolute man monster, the king, Derrick Henry. I mean, obviously he's getting really, really old now. He's got nothing left in the tank. It was a ridiculous signing for the Ravens to pick up. They're obviously really, really concerned as they give 31-year-old Derrick Henry another 2-year contract. Just over 1,900 rushing yards, 16 rushing touchdowns. Are we expecting more of the same this year?
I don't know, man. Like, it is difficult because his age, turning 31 in January, like, we can't pretend it doesn't matter. But equally, Derrick Henry has just shown that he is not like other running backs. And occasionally, when you get outliers, you can bet against him, or you can at a certain point just stop fighting the tide and say, this guy is an outlier, and I have to respect that he's an outlier. And obviously, it was incredible what he did last year with the amount of rushing yards that you just mentioned. But he had 5.91 yards per carry. That led all running backs by far his career best. He also had a career best in success rate. He had the third highest explosive run rate. So it wasn't like he was just getting there through accumulation of volume. He was breaking away. He also had the highest percentage of carries inside the 5 among all running backs because the Ravens don't want to put Lamar Jackson in danger down there. So he brings you everything. He's got the goal line role, but he also breaks big runs. And he avoided being stuffed at the line of scrimmage at the 4th best rate, hit a career high in broken tackles. There is just no reason for me to downplay Derrick Henry in any way. And for anyone who wants to point to his age, as we've kind of hinted at, the pushback is the only time in his 9-year career that he's ever really missed any time was 2021. Otherwise, he's been remarkably healthy. And I just think that viewing Derrick Henry as a risky pick is a risk in itself. And I view it more as his ceiling is fantastic. And maybe he's not going to catch as many balls as we'd like for PPR leagues. He did have the lowest target share of any current round 1 or 2 running back. But what he gives you in touchdowns and volume is so strong that I'm willing to bet on it again.
And it's those touchdowns that were so consistent last year as well. So he only had 5 games in the regular season without a touchdown. Saquon had 8 that were touchdownless. Gibbs not far behind 6, but there was a point in time where you could just chalk in, well, there'll be a touchdown at some point, and that'll put my numbers back up if you had Derrick Henry. And where you were drafting him last year, I think he ended up being significant value because there were the doubters last year. I think at this point is going around RB5. I've got him down as being my RB6 on the season at the minute. That feels about fair, and that little window seems probably where it'll end up landing, isn't it? We're also going to see running backs going higher this season, aren't we? Last season, it was very, very wide receiver heavy. So that value of going RB5, we are looking on the 1-2 turn this season. Last season, that'd probably been mid-second.
Yeah, in best ball, definitely. You could get him in the 3rd round of contests as well. In redraft, he was falling to the 3rd round. And this year, it seems quite clear that we've got Bijan and Saquon as the RB1, RB2, then Jahmyr Gibbs behind him. Then you've got this little mini tier of CMC and Ashton Genty forming. And at the moment, we're starting to see Devon Achane get pushed up ahead of Derrick Henry. But then it's Derrick Henry right around that 1-2 turn. That's my favorite place to pick at the minute. I just think there's so many good players there that I'm happy to double dip.
Looking at the supporting cast behind him then, and there's a couple of interesting names then, someone that we may talk about if injuries were to crop up through the season. Justice Hill is always interesting. Only 5 games last season, over 10 points. He feels like a player that will be rostered because he always does something. As soon as he's dropped, everyone then picks off the waiver wire again. Redraft, I think we'll see him on benches. For me, it's more that value DFS pick that we're going to be talking about Justice Hill in 2025.
Yeah, I think it comes down to situational football when you talk about Justice Hill, because he only had a 24% opportunity share and he only had 47 rush attempts across the whole year, 228 yards. He wasn't used in that situation. The time when the Ravens would turn to him was when they were pass heavy because the defense was busy just trying to lose the game. And he had 51 targets, which I haven't looked this up, but that has to be the most any running backs ever had from Lamar Jackson. Because before Todd Monken was the offensive coordinator, they just didn't throw at the running backs. But Justice Hill, he had the 17th most targets among running backs, and he had the third most receiving yards and most receptions on third and fourth downs. They used him in those obvious passing situations. He did only have a average depth of target of minus 1.9, so 2 yards behind the line of scrimmage on average. And that kind of shows you that he wasn't really running the highest value routes. He did have some flash moments where he was further downfield, but a lot of the time it was screens, it was quick outs, it was trying to get the ball moving in his hands. So I think the production there is a little fragile. But in deeper leagues, I'm kind of fine rostering Justice Hill. But in redraft, I can't see myself ever using him.
No, Keaton Mitchell is a player that I'm certainly not going to be targeting to draft, but is a player that my Ravens bias really hopes he is going to be a fire from the wire pickup. We started to see some really exciting flashes in his rookie season. That injury not only ended that season, but wiped out last season as well. We didn't see him until week 17. He's someone that does interest me moving forwards. Say, do you see a point where he could be a waiver wire pickup, or is Derrick Henry going to have most of that work on such lockdown? Justice Hill getting that situation play that Mitchell is got a very tricky route to being fantasy relevant.
I think if he's healthy, he's a complete wild card. And I think he knows what he needs to do involves become more worthwhile to the team overall. He talked to OTAs about how he wants to be the team's primary kick returner. That gives him a path to being relevant and being on the roster on game days. It'll be pretty much a battle between him and Rasheen Ali to see which running back takes that third spot. If anything was to happen to Justice Hill, I think you can open up immediately a decent sized role for Keaton Mitchell because he is a more natural pass catcher and a more natural kind of player within that role than Rasheen Ali is. Like you go back to 2023 before Mitchell tore his ACL, and only 2 running backs saw over 30 touches that year and averaged above 8 yards per carry. Devon Achant and Keaton Mitchell. Like he has juice. He has been clocking his fastest time since his pre-knee injury this offseason. He said, much like we always hear, you hear the guys are going to be back, guys are going to be healthy. And then the following offseason, it's all the, yep, I'm learning to trust my knee again now, and now I'm feeling much better about it. I didn't realize how much it was bothering me. So I do like Keaton Mitchell. I think he's worth, dart throws in deep dynasties, and definitely I've mixed him in 20-round best ball a little bit, but I'm not expecting massive amounts, and I don't think we'll ever be in a situation in redraft where we want to start him or even roster him.
No, and we've mentioned Ali, and I think he's a player that we are not going to be talking about. We are not targeting. He is someone that just because of the Ravens offense, if there was tragedy in front of him with regards to injuries, we could be talking about. I don't see it happen. We saw lots of talk how he was going to be taking that kick return role last year. Obviously, if you say Mitchell's got that targeted this year as well, it just seems a bit too muddy for Ali to find any sort of fancy relevance, doesn't it? Say, unless there is something catastrophic happens in front of him on the depth chart.
Yeah, and even then, do we believe that coaches would turn everything over to him, or do we think that they'd be looking for someone else? And I'm not sure I can see it. But look, I mean, he wouldn't be the first rookie to improve over time. Like we've seen that story before. So I'm not ruling it out. I just don't expect it to happen.
No, and I think I'm in agreement on that. So before we move on to wide receivers, then please do give us a subscribe. Click up on the top table to our channel and give us a subscribe on YouTube. Or if you're listening on your podcast app of choice, make sure you give us a subscribe, share, follow, etc., etc. We get to talk about a player now that excites me so much to watch week in, week out. But I don't think I can let that excitement really take control when it comes to fantasy due to consistency. And that is Zay Flowers, a player I absolutely love to watch. He's so entertaining. He is probably, though, from a fantasy point of view, one of the clearest examples of someone who is far more valuable in real life than he is to fantasy. And it's that consistency that comes in. So he was a wide receiver, won 16.7% of games last season. a top 24 wide receiver in only a third of games, and it's outside that top 36 in 50%, is so inconsistent. And he only really made that wide receiver 25 based on the fact he played 17 games. Ed and I spoke on our Browns show that Jerry Jeudy, finishing wide receiver 12 last year, certainly flattered him in PPR leagues, but he was there every week in, week out. Have we got a sneaky chance, though, of a true breakout for Zay Flowers in year 3?
Yeah, and I think it just comes down to one thing, and that's touchdowns, which aren't the easiest thing to project. But last year he had 7 end zone targets, but they only resulted in 2 touchdowns. That is obviously quite a low number. It's a number which, if him and Lamar can find that little bit of magic around that, I think can completely click. He only had 4 touchdowns in total last season, which is what really disappointed. Touchdowns are the thing that can make up for you not necessarily seeing the volume that you'd like, or seeing the catches that you'd like, or the yardage that you'd like at times. You look at a guy like Puka Nacua, who's only managed 9 touchdowns over the previous 2 seasons, but he's managed to get there on volume as alone. Whereas then you flip the cards and you find like another wide receiver who perhaps hasn't had the volume but gets there on touchdowns. Someone like Cortland Sutton 2 years ago, where he had like 11 touchdowns. The difference between 4 touchdowns and 8 or 9 touchdowns is what really makes the difference in whether you pay off your cost in fantasy. But Zay, I mean, he's had over 100 targets in back-to-back years. His passer rating when targeted has been over 100 in both years. And he's had a 30% first read target share last year. Nobody else in the Ravens offense was over 16%. So when Lamar had the ball, he was trying to find Zay as often as possible. And I think that counts for a lot. I mean, you and me know as Ravens fans that Lamar is very much, he's going to have to trust you to be able to really give you everything. And I'm kind of just okay saying Zay's price is fine. I'm not desperate to have him in redraft, but I also think that he comes at a point in drafts where you're starting to have to choose between players who bring problems with them and bring question marks. They're not players who necessarily feel overly reliable. So in current ADP, you are looking at him sort of sandwiched between Travis Hunter, George Pickens, Calvin Ridley, Rome Odunze. I'm okay saying Zay Flowers plays on the best offense in the league, and that's why I'm going to select him.
Yeah, and he feels like he's safe for 80-ish receptions, safe for just over 1,000 yards again. As you said, the touchdowns are going to make and break his season. And we hear a lot of touchdowns on the stickiest of stats. You can't rely just because a player's got over 10 one season, they're going to do the same again. We can't assume because he's not shown it last season that he's not going to go on and do that himself this year. And there certainly were a lot of passing touchdowns floating around. If we look at the wide receivers behind him, Rashod Bateman alone, 9 touchdowns last year. A player that I was ridiculed on X when I'd suggested he could be a useful flex pickup later in drafts. And I said, I can't remember who it was that tweeted, but I searched through my thread, found the post, and it'd been deleted. And someone said, come back and tell him he's had one fancy relevant game. And I wanted that receipt so badly. But no, Rashod Bateman is not a player you are targeting to plug and play in each week. He finished wide receiver 40 last year. He's currently going those wide receiver 61. At that point, so around round 12, 13, I'm happy picking up someone like Rashod Bateman, because that is also going to lead. Were Zay to miss time at any point, Rashod Bateman then becomes very interesting as a weekly play. The problem was last time it was only 5 or more targets in 7 games. Yes, Zay was out there every single game, week in, week out. It's that volume that kind of we want to see, and I'm not sure we necessarily are going to see that leap in that. I think we probably know what Rashod Bateman is and what he's going to do now.
Yeah, I think we saw the true Rashod Bateman last year, and now we've had 2 years where he's been pretty much healthy throughout. It becomes easier to trust him. But it also becomes a case of he's not necessarily going to be giving you the range he's in, even if we say that he's a wide receiver 3. These are guys that need to score touchdowns each week to be good fantasy starts. You know, you're talking about guys who can't command 100-yard games routinely, who can't command enough catches to pay off in PPR routinely. You're talking realistically about guys who go 5 for 55 and a touchdown, something like that. And that can be enough to be a good usable week sometimes. And Rashod Bateman is the kind of guy for deeper leagues, which is much more fun. But in your traditional leagues, it's going to be tough. I mean, he shone in the playoffs. He had a higher catch rate last year than Zay Flowers, despite his average depth of target being 4 yards deeper. So I do think that we are seeing a player emerge, but I'm just not how much higher the ceiling can be.
DeAndre Hopkins coming in as well. We're not going to see the D-Hop old. We know that. I think realistically, we're probably going to have 2, if we're lucky, 3 big D-Hop games fantasy. If we can predict where they are, absolutely amazing. I'm not sure it's going to be particularly easy. The one thing I can say I think is very positive for D-Hop with the Ravens is that feels like an acceptable upgrade on Nelson Aguilar from last season, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Chiefs didn't really use him in a way that lets us gauge what Hopkins still got left. I think it speaks volumes that he wanted to be in Baltimore. He's talked about playing with Lamar plenty of times, but it's year 13, $5 million contract. It is what it is, and he's only played 16 games over the last 2 years combined. So nobody in redraft is probably going to be drafting DeAndre Hopkins, but it should be a fun one to watch it play out.
And then someone who will also go undrafted, Tylan Wallace. Tylan Wallace feels like he had a better season than he actually last season. I think mainly because I have that 84-yard touchdown against the Bengals rooted and etched into my brain. He's another player who, if you have a dice roll on him in DFS one week, he could well pay back dividends. He will have a game at some point, and that may be a big waiver wire week. He's one to watch, isn't he? But similar to Ali, well, perhaps not similar to Ali. I think he's got a clearer route than Ali. Injuries ahead of him. He could be someone we're talking about as a waiver pickup at some point, but that's probably the best outcome for him, isn't it?
Honestly, I'm not even sure that we get to that point, because when we talk about Bateman, we're talking about a guy who we see as barely being fantasy relevant. And then it's like, okay, so does he need injuries to both Bateman and to Zay Flowers in order to be relevant? Last year, out of the 7 games he played, he only had 2 where he played over 24% of the snaps. Like, if they wanted to get him involved in a way which was more productive, I think we would have seen it by now. And much as I love Tylan Wallace for his kind of cult status hero among Ravens fans, it's just not something I can imagine myself going near it. See.
His value is as a squad player, isn't it? Supposed to use that kind of British footballing term as well, rather than having those big flash games. I am really, really hoping that you can make a situation crystal clear for us now, though, Tom. And that is the tight end situation as we enter 2025 in Baltimore. Now, first up, Mark Andrews. Obviously, last season was not his best season. I'm not saying that for a second. I also don't think last season was as bad as social media would lead us to believe. But considering he was being drafted as a tight end 3 last year and that inconsistency we saw from him, he's certainly in the bust category when you think he was being drafted quite highly this stage last year. Well, this stage and later last year, wasn't he?
Yeah, and there was a lot of hope for him. There was a lot of people, myself included, who thought that he was the better value elite tight end. Obviously, that didn't play out in the way that we hoped it would. But the takeaway from that should be that broken fibulas are tricky. Mark Andrews was coming off that. He also had a very nasty car crash during training camp that we didn't hear an awful lot about, but it probably should have set alarm bells off a little bit more. It's just kind of tricky for me to get as upset about Mark Andrews as a lot of people did. Yes, the final catch in the playoff game against the Bills was truly egregious and really hurtful. The fumble before that, where he turned back into traffic, was even worse, in my opinion. But this is a guy who is 247 yards away from the most all-time receiving yards by a Raven. He already has the touchdown record with 55, and he did that on 136 fewer targets than Todd Heap did. He ran pure last year with 11 touchdowns on 15 red zone targets. There's no denying that. But you've got a guy who Lamar Jackson trusts emphatically in the end zone and emphatically to come up big. And obviously he didn't against the Bills, but I'm still betting on him to have a decent season this year.
I've got him down projected around tight end 12 this season. I think the competition from the player we're going to talk about next will feed a bit into that. Is tight end 12 too low, do you think, or is that where you see the season going?
I think it's too low for me. I think that I'm more confident in kind of like the 8 to 9 range. I don't think that he's necessarily fast these days, but Mark Andrews, maybe you'd have 1 or 2 plays a year where you saw him kind of breaking away, but it's more like Travis Kelce. It's the nuance and understanding the pockets in zone coverage, the ways to shake defenders off and the ways to make himself available when Lamar's breaking down. The trouble for him really when it comes to Isaiah Likely is that Isaiah Likely has also picked up on that, and Isaiah Likely is now incredibly good at being that reliable player when Lamar is running around in the pocket for 13 seconds at a time. So I do think it will be more of a committee than it was last year, but I think that we'll have enough usable weeks from both guys that I'm willing to roster both of them in different formats. I don't want them on the same team, obviously, but Likely looked like he took a step down the stretch last year. I know we're kind of moving on to him, so I'll just carry on with my love letter to Likely, because he had career highs in touchdowns, receptions, yardage. But for fantasy, he was largely irrelevant for most of the season. Week 1, he was that tight end 1 overall against the Chiefs. And then he only had 3 more top 12 finishes. He is incredible on broken plays. He does have some real movement to him. He is really fast, but I don't think it's as straightforward as some non-Ravens fans seem to think it is.
Are we going to see the start of a changing of the guard this season? Do you think is he the future at tight end, and we're going to see some of that transition, or if he's the future at tight end, will we see the workload being shared out to protect him a little bit?
I think they'll give Likely as much as they can draw up for him and as much as they feel comfortable. I think that Likely probably gets a contract extension by the end of July. And then it becomes abundantly clear that their plan is Isaiah Likely and that Mark Andrews can leave at the end of the year when his contract runs out. By that point, Mark Andrews should be the franchise record holder in receiving yards and touchdowns, which would be a suitable way for him to go out at that point. I don't think they were ever going to get good trade value for him. Likely deserves a serious contract, and maybe there will be moments in the season where Mark Andrews is on the bench whilst Isaiah Likely is the only tight end on the field. And that's not something that we've necessarily seen as much over the last couple of years. But I don't think it'll be drastically from the get-go.
Looking at the touchdowns, obviously 6 touchdowns for Likely last season, 11 to Mark Andrews. I think it'll be that touchdown seesaw that's going to be interesting this season when it comes to that fantasy relevance as well, because Likely made himself known as a red zone target as well. I still can't get past that first game of the season last year where he was almost the hero against Kansas, but for a big toe. His ADP feels fair at this stage, but I think I agree. You're not going to want them. Definitely want them both on the same roster. I think a lot of people will take Andrews and Likely later as that handcuff, but I think you're then just left in a situation of who to go for each week and week out, aren't you?
Oh, yeah.
I'd rather have that gamble of a streamable tight end from Likely if I needed to add a tight end one in a tough situation, maybe.
Yeah, I think Likely is the kind of player that if you draft someone like Colston Loveland or Tyler Warren and you're shooting for ceiling, then Likely makes a lot of sense to pair with them. I think that you could look to take Likely as a second tight end if you've got enough bench spots when you've got one of the elite tight ends further up. But drafting Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely together is just a surefire way to lose your league.
Well, thank you very much, Tom. It's been a pleasure talking all things Baltimore with you as we look ahead to our 2025 redraft season. Where can people find the rest of your fantastic content if they want to hear more from you?
Yeah, you can head over to Fantasy Sanctuary on YouTube or on Twitter. We've got a lot of stuff coming out there. We've got a video coming out about rookie tight ends and whether you should draft them or not in the next week. And then in written content, everything goes through Fantasy Pros. I've written an absurd amount of articles in the last couple of months for them, as well as hosting the Fantasy Pros Best Ball show every Monday at 9 p.m. UK time.
Well, amazing. Thank you very much, Tom. To those of you watching or listening, please go and check out the rest of our deep dive shows for the rest of the AFC North and beyond. But for now, I think we've said all we can about the Baltimore Ravens. So it's goodbye from me, goodbye from Tom, and Malcolm. It's time to take us home.
You have been listening to Pestle and Ed of TH Fantasy Football. For more content, follow TH_fantasy_NFL on Instagram and Twitter.